Namaste and in Lak'ech, and welcome to this episode of One World in a New World. I'm your host, Zen Benefiel, and please do like, subscribe, share, and visit planetarycitizens.net and download your free book called Planetary Citizens: Awakening the Heart of Humanity. It's an overview of our activity and how it might affect you in your worldview that might be able to have a little upgrade. So thanks for that ahead of time. Our guest this week is Paul Joseph Rovelli. And Paul and I met a little while ago. I actually appeared on his podcast as well, the Gnostic Rebellion, and we'll get into that in just a little bit. It's a really interesting conversation. He is the founder and director of the Gnostic Church of LVX, or 65 if you're Roman. He's a piano instructor and author, just releasing Thelemic Kabbalah, and I hope I pronounced that right. He's also authored Insights into Liber 65 or Liber X, LXV. So he's going to be a really interesting conversation, and I'm sure we're going to take a deep dive. So don't go away. We'll be right
Whether
back.
you're a leader steering a team, an entrepreneur chasing a vision, or an individual ready to level up, I can help you align purpose and performance so that you can navigate change with confidence, clarity, and yes, a little bit of Zen. Life's complex. Your next step doesn't have to be.
Paul Joseph, it is such a pleasure to have you here, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. I know it's going to be just a lot of fun.
Well, I'm looking forward to it too because I know we connected really well on my podcast, and I just left with a big smile on my face,
Oh,
so
me
it felt
too.
good.
Me too. Well, let's carry that on. All right.
Yeah.
So, as you know, and we talked about earlier, we're bereft of having the our inner lives shared with others and conversation, being able to, match what's going on inside with the exterior world and finding out if others are having a similar experience. Because oftentimes we don't take that opportunity to find out if what I'm perceiving is the same thing you're perceiving. And when it matches, wow, there's the fun, right? So for yourself, and when this field that you chose to go into had to have started way back when. I don't know if we'll step in the way back machine, and maybe Peabody and Sherman will both enjoy us.
Well,
Uh,
I would say it was always there for me. I mean, even as a 4-year-old in a very devout Roman Catholic family, I insisted on going to Mass 4 years earlier. And I heard the last of the Latin Masses that were said.
hmm.
Um, so I always had that bend. I used to play priest with my dad. I'd take a missal home from the church, and we'd make up a Eucharist, and we'd sit at the bar down in the basement, and I'd be the priest and he'd be the congregation for me.
Uh,
So
that's that's just really,
that
that's
motive
that's
was always
bizarre,
in me.
right? You got to admit, and yet, how connected you felt yourself to be at such an early stage in life.
Well, I mean, I certainly felt connected to my family in those
Hmm.
days. Um, I was devout and precocious in a very devout Roman Catholic family. So at least at that period of my life, I had a good relationship with my family. It would be the
Sure.
last period of my life that I had a
Well,
good
let's talk
relationship.
about that precociousness. What was that about?
Um, I was moved with spirit. I think the easiest example of that would be I was one of the smartest kids in my public school class, and this other guy, Paul Riggy, was also one of the smartest kids in the public school class, and we were both in the same Sunday catechism.
Hmm.
And we had to take an end of the
No,
year
that's
test.
trouble.
We had to take an end of the year test to win this medal, right? And Paul Riggy and I both aced the test at 100%, but the nun gave me the medal, and she said it was because Paul Riggy's just plain smart. He's not into it. You're into it. And that was
That's an
always
interesting
perceived
perspective,
by the
right?
people around me. That was always perceived by my family. It wouldn't be until our teenage years when we're catching up with the end of the 60s and the early 70s and into the punk generation where we really manifest.
Right.
And I'm just using that as a time period. I was the only punker in the house. Um, and maybe because they followed just far enough to be into that next generation kind of thing, where I was like the last hanging, dingleberry of the boomers.
Right, right, right. Well, yeah, we're both kind of in that place, right? There was a special period in the 70s for us.
Yeah, we were at a time when we realized that we were not going to follow in the footsteps of our parents. I wasn't going to go get a job and the company would keep me for life. And that gave us great pause, in the acceptance of the system, and
Right.
I think it slowed the maturity a bit. Of course, some succeeded, and of course, they were bothered in a different way. I think
Sure.
everybody had a different
Well,
approach.
and even today, there's a multi-generational complexity in the workplace that spans the gamut of those different shifts in the periods of their lives and the maturation levels, and everybody thinks they ought to be, coherent,
But
which they're
we
not.
have fun exploring that in each other at work.
Yeah,
Like there's these guys that are in their 40s and they got, each got the two kids. And um so we're always comparing music, movies, memories, and they have like what their parents listened to and that kind of thing going on. And so we have fun exploring that,
sure.
and we,
Speaking of music, though, what was the song or the tune that ignited your spirit the most? If there was one, or you're welcome to name two or three if you'd like. I'm
I
just
mean,
curious.
the first thing I recognize, I remember in kindergarten walking home from school, or was it first grade? I don't know for sure, but I was definitely that young.
Hmm.
And I'm walking home from school, and I could hear the four-part harmony to the Beatles' Nowhere Man in my head. He's a real nowhere man, sitting in
Right.
his nowhere land, making all his nowhere plans for nobody.
Hmm.
And
Nice voice.
I could hear that four-part harmony like I was listening to it in a recording, a synesthesia.
Sure. Sure.
And I wanted to play piano. My grandmother played piano. There was a piano in the house with my grandmother. And when Miss Schimmel, my kindergarten teacher, played the piano, it really amazed me. But in my teenage years, I'm laying down one night in the middle of the night listening to Vin Scelsa on WFMU, and he was always introducing new stuff. And he said, "Guys, you gotta hear this." And he puts on Patti Smith's first album, first song. Jesus died for somebody's sins, but not mine. And it goes on in this whole
Hmm.
poem called Gloria, based on the Van Morrison song Gloria, but she rewrote it as Gloria in Excelsis Deo. So that woke me up. That was the final thing because I was already debating leaving the church
Right.
and going to see a priest every Sunday and talking to my mom and all that stuff. And I
Just
was
didn't
ready
quite
to
make sense
leave.
anymore, huh?
Yeah. And that song came on, that became the heart of our generation. Patti Smith became, the queen of punk,
Hmm.
and she was trying to start her own punk religion of art. And I was going into surrealism and I was painting and sculpting and I was learning the piano and filming and, you know, doing all these different things while I was reading philosophy and metaphysics and spirituality and history and politics, at least
Now,
political
with
thought.
all of that, that's a rich thing. It's like you're describing my life as well. Um, and in some respects, I am you and you are me, right? Cuckoo, cuckoo.
Well, you're asking very wide questions, and
Right.
so there's a lot
I
into
did.
that I could just easily fill.
Um, there's, something in that when you're ignited from that place, where do you take that? And let me ask you this, during that period too, did you have a day job or were
Oh, I
you,
did all sorts of things.
okay.
Sometimes
Well,
I
because
was
what I'm
unemployed
getting
out
at
of
is
high
the
school and in
mix.
college, but I was usually in a band. So
Hmm.
we were rehearsing 3 to 5 nights a week. I was writing when the band wasn't rehearsing. Um, I still had to make money.
Right.
At one point I was in college with a full schedule. I was in 5 different school organizations, one of which I founded. I was in my band and I was working 2 jobs.
Now that's it. I couldn't go that far. I was working as a machinist, a meat cutter, and playing in a band. Similar things, the 4 night a week on the weekends and 3 nights of practice
Well,
during the
yeah, I
week.
mean, we each had our own experience of that. I've been
Yeah.
very lost in my creativity and probably obsessive. People have called me an workaholic, and I pretty much am.
I- Well, when you have passion and creativity and curiosity as to what you can do, right, and attempting to do it, failing forward, if you will, a lot. Um, this just it drives us, or at least some of us. Now, in respect to that, how did you see others and in that perspective, because you were a highly functional, what the octopus movement calls multi-potentialite, right? A polymath, or there's all kinds of terms today for people
The
like us.
Renaissance man. I was the
Yeah,
Renaissance man.
right. So how did you see that imbuing your life with others in relationship to what was happening with you in other
I saw it
situations?
in very frank terms.
Hmm.
Um, I was a threat in the business world. I was as much as I was well enjoyed. Like when I was freelancing in Manhattan, um, I was always freelancing for executive VPs. I was at a very high level,
Hmm.
being their assistant kind of a thing. And I came in yellow suits and two-tone blue suits and even one time on Wall Street, one of the vendors on the sign says, "You're the only guy I've ever seen with the least little bit of color coming down here," and they just stopped to thank me. They enjoyed watching me every day. They would think I'm a nut, and then I would go in and I would do these like really great jobs for them and make them a lot of money, and they would be really, really happy with me, and I would do all sorts of, So I had one guy that gave me overtime just because he looked at me funny one day, and then of course he gave me overtime for having the overtime, and then there's overtime more because I had to handle the embarrassment, so this gave me a little kick. And I mean I was standing on Park Avenue, 666 Park Avenue, with 2 giant computer units, word processing units, that I just got tipped on a job that I just did
Hmm.
for an insurance company. Um, I The day I left, they all the execs there each got me my own bottle of vodka because they knew I liked high class vodka, and so they all got me. I walked out with a big bag of high class vodka.
Hmm.
And the one guy that I worked directly for, he cried. I mean, so, and I could tell you so many funny stories, but at the same time, I'm the outsider um, in every world. Whether we go professional or we go personal and social.
Sure.
Um,
I like the
because
term
I'm the
many hat
Renaissance
man,
man.
right?
I clearly did not take, I'm not coming home in my, Brooks Brothers suit, climbing out of the Mercedes in the large house. Okay. Um, and So it's obvious I haven't sold my soul to the world. I never did.
Right.
And I never really succeeded in the world. I made some patches of money in certain places.
Well, sure. What I've found, and I think this is common with a lot of multi-potentialites, is that because of that willingness to give our all without in a fearless way, right? We're kind of given what we need just to get us through and allow us to enjoy that ability that we have and the skill set that we develop. Uh,
Well,
do you
in
find
my
that to
own
be
way, I
true?
live for my art. So I put all my money into my art.
Hmm.
So I built the Gnostic Church of Light, the first fully owned, no mortgage, and operating Gnostic church on the continents of the Americas, expressing a modern form of Gnosticism that understands the development from ancient Gnosticism through Western culture.
Hmm.
And yet we focus on the individual. When you were on my program, I was looking for your genius. I was looking for you to give that inspirational moment into which, you can describe your experience.
Right.
And that belongs in a place and time, right? You might say or respond completely different today because it's a different day.
It's a different day, and we flipped sides, right? This is I'm inquiring of you and those kinds of experiences, uh, and you drew that out of me, as I recall, to some degree, and yet, so in this quest for connection, for resonance, for coherence, what kinds of things do you recall that brought that? Elevated, almost cosmically connected, let's say cosmically connected, essence and purpose in your life.
Um, I connected, or I could say I identified with certain things that resonated in my heart. The Cabaret Voltaire, the Surrealist and Dadaist movement that moved out of that. And of course, Van Gogh and the can't think of the word right now. Impressionists meant a lot to me too, but
Mhm.
how that fed into science and what modern science is discovering, that's changing the whole formula of the ancient world. Just there's not much left that makes any sense in that world anymore. Um, and the beatniks and the beat movement, Jack Kerouac on the road, you know,
Mhm.
um Allen Ginsberg, who I got to meet, and I have a wonderful letter from him. He didn't like my poetry, so uh, um,
So you're talking about a lot of the outer stuff. I'm
well,
like,
but no, there was
okay,
this
you're getting there.
these guys, their writings and their works were
Yes.
inspirations for me after leaving the church and wandering. Really not knowing what's up yet, but
Mm.
really finding that this art movement stirs the soul, and I needed to create, and I think I created some fascinating and interesting things. I think my bands made a connection with people. Um,
Music tends to do that, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
but we were very, let's just say my bands were relatively out of left field, especially my first one. I
I
was
can't imagine that.
um, And so I thought art was the matrix, right? I'm following Patti Smith as deeply, and she loved Rambo as much as I did, and Jim Morrison, and
Right, right.
this stuff was talking about an American soul, a human soul, and here I am in search for my soul, and so I start writing and composing and trying to develop my own message, when I began to discover for the first time that a song I wrote no longer relied on the modeling of those songwriters that I admired in my attempt to write,
Hmm.
but the combinations of parts of the song were entirely my own.
Hmm.
You know, the influences may be heard, but it was
Well,
my
sure. I mean, don't you feel like we're all assimilationists and then we add our own creative spark?
well, that's just it. I translated from being an assimilationist, into to having my own voice.
Right.
I had already had a bed of poetry that was already there. And I didn't do well with sculpture and painting. Let's just leave it at that. Um, but I stayed serious with my songwriting, really into my mid to late 30s. I was still
Hmm.
doing it. Um,
Now, did your Gnostic training or your interest in Gnosticism come through yet in that? Or
well,
was that?
now in college, I studied a lot of mysticism with a professor that,
Hmm.
taught mystical studies. I encountered Jung, and I encountered some of the New Age goody goodies too. But I got an exposure to that, and meanwhile, I'm sitting, in my philosophy course, reading Plato's Republic, and so I'm getting the whole round of this stuff, and the mysticism class just fit in well with the existentialist class, it just went like that semester
Well,
to
sure. Well,
semester.
and you saw the connection. That's what you felt it, that there was no difference. It was other perspectives of the same, right? Just seen through a different lens.
Yeah, but at this time in my life, I was a man also trapped in my own soul in a way, and I don't mean that to pull out the little violin.
Hmm.
Um, I was so focused on my creativity, uh, and had no ability to connect with the outside world yet, except through my creativity, through
Sure.
my intelligence, my genius. People loved me to show up and read poetry or give a lecture on this or that. I was always a good speaker, so I had a rich life that was always there, through the things that I did. Um, I formalized my mystical studies eventually. And I would even describe myself as would describe most beginning spiritual students. I was quite friggin' nuts. Um, if you read my college diaries, I wouldn't want them ever. They should be burned before I die. It's such an
Well, yeah,
embarrassment
we
of
often
how
have a lot of
friggin'
crazy
nuts I
thoughts,
was.
right?
Hmm?
We often have a lot of crazy thoughts that are just bizarre. And of course, during
Well,
that period
let's
too.
just say I was a full-time violinist. Even though I had, the relationships with the outside world, um, but
There was
I
still this
wasn't a
guy up here,
social,
playing the little violin, right?
yeah. Well, I wasn't a social success because, like highly intelligent people, I still have a difficulty with light conversation.
Well, you don't
Can't talk
need
about the
others for
weather and
entertainment.
relationships.
You keep yourself busy with all the different interests and things. Um, and I think a lot of us are that way. You reach that point where the relationships in the world don't match your interest and curiosity level and your ability to explore. And so it's hard to find those that will
It
play
really
along
is.
with you.
It really truly is. They say if you find one true friend in life, you've lived a successful life.
Hmm.
And I believe I have that one true friend. I really, really do. We're as close as family can be. He's an adopted child and, estranged from his sister. And the oldest child estranged from my four brothers and sisters. Uh, and so we've made family, and I'm talking over the decades. He was a guitarist in one of my bands,
Hmm.
my last band. That's how we met, and we did some great, great things together. Wonderful stories we could tell.
Right. I'll bet.
Um, hmm?
I said, I bet you have some wonderful stories
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. So now in these later years, really since the founding of the church and the way it forced me to focus my message, I've mellowed a lot. I've come to see people, and that's why I've launched the Gnostic Rebellion, is that I've come to see the genius in people. I just had to see it myself first. And when I finally caught it there, I became open to your genius. And you don't have to be a superstar. Because I was always open to the great geniuses, the great writers.
Sure.
I've always been, obsessed with the significance of their contribution
Right.
and when
But you
it
don't
does.
often see yourself in that way. And is that maybe part of self-love, is embracing yourself and your own greatness? Not to be egotistical or anything like that, but just to acknowledge yourself and what you have and carry.
Um, yes, a complete self-acknowledgement.
Yeah.
The joke is, I'm not conceited, I'm convinced.
Right.
You know,
Well, it's the difference between self-aggrandizement and humility, right? Because in that place, when you truly recognize your own genius, it's a really humbling experience.
um, I didn't find anything particularly humbling. I found something redeeming.
That too.
That
That
was
that goes along with it. It's the maybe I used the because there's this sense of uh, just feeling whole.
well, I mean, a lot of people find me arrogant because I take great pride in my accomplishments. And to them, that's an arrogance. To me, that's part of the
It's part of
expression
you. It's
of
you're just
myself.
stating
I
the fact.
am what
These are
I
the things
do.
that happened, right?
Well, I
Uh,
am what I do.
right. Uh,
So, if we're going to bring that, to any kind of conscious sphere, if you're really on me for something I've written, something I've said, something I've done, um, then we have something to talk about. If as you start to generalize that, um, then it's an objectification that I'm going to cut you off of. Don't objectify.
mhm.
Okay, continue to relate. And I've realized that even as a child, I've always been open to relate. It's the naivete of a child. They automatically open
Well,
up to
sure.
anybody they see.
It's the curiosity. It's the wanting to know more and asking the questions that very few others do. And so to some, even those questions, kind of set them back because nobody asks them, right? You ask
Well, I
somebody,
mean, before you go into all the heavy stuff, where I'm really going with that is, um, I'm trying.
"Wasn't trying to be heavy. You're my brother, remember?"
Yeah, I, I think that when you come to a place where you begin to see the star in all people,
Mhm.
uh, it really is a natural following of the star that you found in yourself.
Right.
But just because I can see someone's star doesn't mean they can. Just like I
Absolutely.
couldn't see my own star for a long time.
Sure.
You know, for
Sure.
me, that star was a form of ego, and I was an arrogant pig. You know, but I was also young and inexperienced.
Well, sure.
So many
You
things.
know, so here we're talking about the maturation process,
Yes.
right? When did you notice that, oh, I don't like me anymore.
In what I said about that, the openness of the naive child, I still want everyone to like me.
Hmm.
You know,
Well, we all, our core, we talked about this on your show, right? Our core is to love and be loved. That's our core desire.
yeah,
That's,
it's a core energy.
yeah.
Now, I've developed a very thick skin. I've had people say all the worst things about me you can imagine.
Well, yeah,
And
because
if
you
I
push
did
all
one
the, I
tenth
do
of it,
too,
forget
right?
about
When you're asked questions that cause people to question their belief system and or come up with it, oh, that's not true anymore, right? They, right, that's confrontational unintentionally.
it. Well, they put up their wall of cognitive dissonance,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
So, can you fight that?
You can't fight it. You can dance with it sometimes.
But that's just as ridiculous, right?
It depends on whether, if you have a path that you can walk down together and you're able to facilitate that, then it's a learning opportunity for both of you. It's a win-win. And
Um, Most
potentially,
people will never ever come out of their cognitive dissonance. You cannot cast pearls before swine. They're zombies. And that's really most people. Um, I, I,
well, I'm
I
like
think,
you. I see the star in others, and I will, often speak to them at their level and then just kind of take them up a little bit, see if they're willing to step up. And I agree, a lot of them aren't.
I think people are on the course that they're on. And
Hmm.
any judgment that I make about that course is a false judgment. Until and
Very true.
unless I get to know, any particular person in him or herself.
Well, it's
And
what Jesus said,
that's a
love.
closeness of time. That's an intimacy that you have to develop.
Yeah. And once you do, now, would you say that that resides in that core of self-love that you then share with others just because
Well,
it's there and you
yes,
don't have to question it?
you have to come to a place where you recognize that you are self-created and you have created your life.
Hmm. You have sovereignty, agency, if you
Your
will.
sovereignty is based on that.
Yeah.
You are responsible for the creation. Give up on this, in the beginning, God created, big dicks. No. Um, you created your entire self. You've been doing it since you first gestated, since, the two little thingies went, you know,
Right.
it's we can blame our emotional lives on our parents until the day we turn 18, but then we got to recognize that we're the ones that have been building this all along, and we got to take
Sure.
our own responsibility for ourselves. And with that maturity in mind, um, we 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 cannot only not stop blaming our parents and the world around us, but also stop blaming our gods, and maybe with a little bit of luck stop recognizing that there's something out there called a god sitting on a throne in his narcissistic delight with
Sure.
angels running around him all day going, you're marvelous, you're wonderful, you're marvelous,
Right.
you're wonderful. It gets really lurid. And so here we are stepping outside of superstition, stopping to believe that these old myths are actual stories, of
Hmm.
things that actually happened with actual beings, not taking the responsibility to be the God that I am or that you are.
Well, this is what the Vedas say, right? 15,000-year-old Sanskrit poems that basically say we're all divine threads connected to source, capable of God consciousness. Well, that God consciousness is the sovereignty. It's the creators of our reality, right? That we
Well,
have the
the God
ability to do.
consciousness for me is me. And I'm not a thread of any other God. I'm not a spark from the intimate fire. I'm quite the opposite. I am the God of the God, and you are too. And
So that
so
means
is
somewhere we're connected in
no,
that.
no. We're all that one God. Okay. And I don't buy into, um, we're all interconnected in this way. As I take up space, I push other gods aside, right?
Mhm.
I'm born, I take my first breath, get out of my fucking way. Okay? So, like Heidegger says this, being is violence. It's the natural violence of being. And think of how much you have killed in your life. It doesn't matter that you buy it neatly at the supermarket, but you've killed and you've killed and you've killed and you've killed and you've killed. So life is a violent, violent space. And stop putting things on higher and lower scales. Meat is no more cooler than vegetables.
So you're not
Okay.
a Hawkins fan, huh?
Well, certainly not a vegan fan, because that's a religion, not a diet. Um, I believe in the divinity of my soul, and it connects to non-individuated spirit. And that non-individuated spirit, you could say, is the master hologram. But I am
Hmm.
identical to it, and you are identical to it. Like a hologram works, any part of the hologram is the same as the whole.
Right.
Okay. Now, when we get into the specifics of what most people mean by interconnectedness, I begin to have, skeptical issues. Because, if we're all one, I'll take your bank account number at any point and I need your passwords.
Well, maybe there's a slight misunderstanding of that phrase. So, from my perspective, that would you call it the non-corporeal spirit or the non, right?
Well,
That stuff that we're all
yeah,
part of,
the
right?
hologram.
Right. So, in that, then the diversity is naturally going to be in harmony because that's how it's designed, right? It's not designed to be separate from, it's designed to be united. So this um, more or less a separative notion when that flow of information specific to us, right? Because we're individuated, right? We have a particular frequency that we operate in that operates with other frequencies. And we see those as other human beings in this situation that we're talking about, right? Well, in that, there is that core of loving and being loved, right? That's brings us all together. Now, we come to that place individuated in our own way, on our own path, in our own time, with our own perspectives. And yet we can still recognize that these all fit together and like your skill set with the corporate guys that just loved you, right? That was a
Well, it's
perfect fit for them.
interaction there, right? Every person I interact with is a Eucharist,
Right,
whether that person is somebody that I make love to or that person punches me in the nose. You know what I'm saying? It's all a sacrament. Everything, it's not that it's a lesson, but it's a buildup of my experience.
right.
And
Well, that came from, this, and I agree. There's a nebulous concept of oneness. We don't really look at it from a science standpoint of what really is that? How does it look? How does it show up? What's the evidence of it? And
well, the oneness always has a creator at the beginning, and this old cosmological line that really is a false line. That there was the causeless cause who then created, causes. It reflects through ancient Gnosticism, ancient Christianity, ancient Judaism, ancient
Mhm.
Islam, um, and it infects Western culture terribly and has for a long time. Um, and
Well,
So as soon
why
as
do
you
you
get
think
to
that
that
is?
creator,
What?
well, then you got to get back to that guy that started it all, the guy on the throne, you know. And I say that you are God of very God. You are the God on the throne. And I am God of very God. And look in the paper basket, because there's God of very God.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So Hitler is God of very God. Gandhi is God of very God. There is, I am the truth, and wrapped in my turban is nothing but God. So,
Now, how do you feel like in that sense, right? There's still this agent that has sovereignty,
well,
right?
certainly this non individuated spirit is giving this body and soul agency. And let's just say the body starts out with very minimal soul. Because it's just the mitochondria in all of your cellular structure. They're all conscious beings. And so you're a collective of that has built this body.
Hmm.
And
And
whatever your
it all
star may
comes
have
from
been
our mother, right?
inherited as you've moved through evolution to get to where you are now, um, and that all moves you. That's your initial inspiration. But then eventually, um, as your soul learns to connect with that non-individuated spirit, you realize that that non-individuated spirit is with you because it's trying to become individuated. And so
Right.
this is part of your evolutionary path that
Sure.
really has
And
always been
those
there,
have several names too. Dr. Irvin Laszlo calls it the higher self.
which I
You're
kind of I use, but I don't like using it.
right, right. And then there's the Urantia book that calls it the thought adjuster,
Yeah, I can't go with
right?
them though.
Um, well, there's a lot of attempts to name something, which as soon as you do, you put it in a box and it's constricted. You
Yes.
put limitations on
You're
it.
anthropomorphizing it. So
Right.
eventually Jesus becomes okay to talk about again. And the next thing you know, you're back in church on Sunday, having been, the son who strayed away and then came back, and dad gave him the kingdom because he learned better.
Right.
Right? The
Now, how do
prodigal son.
you, let's take it to another level. How do you see these interdimensional, interspatial communications that take place with these, or at least from the records that we have, there's a lot of indications that there's no veil and that individuals can show up to others and deliver information, or at least have, and even have conversations. How, what's the inner workings of that you're
I'm
aware
kind
of?
of
And
Jungian on that in the sense that, I believe, right now I'm debating some guy because I call it the subconscious a lot of times, and
okay,
Jung called it the unconscious. I don't, you know what I'm saying? Either way, the subconscious, you're
sub
not
or un, you
conscious of it,
still got
you're
to become
unconscious of it.
aware, right?
They're
That's the
synonyms, and
objective.
he's trying to tell me they're not synonyms. So I'll use them interchangeably. But
Okay,
you have two layers to this subconscious or unconscious part of your being. Your conscious layer, we're both relating,
hmm,
using our conscious layer. Whether or
sure,
not we're conscious of each other per se, there's some limited perceptive thing going on, and there's other stuff that may not be. You know what I'm saying? Your old
right.
buddy could be watching this and saying, "There he goes again." So. Um, but after the personal unconscious is the um, collective unconscious. And there are the archetypes of,
The means
at
and
least
creodes
two
that
in the
Sheldrake
world.
talks about.
Yeah. Your buddy that's a fighter, or, he's got the archetype of the warrior, and the guy that smokes, has got the Marlboro Man, and and he's the rugged individualist and that kind of thing, right?
Right.
So the things that we do are built on archetypes, the matriarch, the patriarch, et cetera, right? Um, and so these are preternatural voices. And when you realize that we have all sorts of motives, and Jung really got a lot of this from Nietzsche, we have all sorts of motives. And there's a motive for everything, and it may not present itself in the opportune moment. So we're balancing all those motives, right? You
Right.
meet your neighbor's daughter and you really want to fuck her, and you got to really turn that motive off, right? Um, so as some people, either through repression or through natural ability or whatever, project these things. And what they used to call angels and spirits, they're now calling intergalactic beings and UFOs. Um, and I think it's just a misapprehension of them understanding the depths of their souls that they have been ignoring and not building up. And so maybe
That
some
could
part
be.
of, huh?
That could be, and yet, um,
And
with
yet, when you're touching the preternatural, they can reveal to the individual universal ideas, ideas that apply to, a group, a society, the world at large. Um, and so it can be quite shamanic. Again, some people it's natural ability.
right. I mean, we're talking even the clairals, right? The clairaudience, clairsentience, all those kinds of things, and then you've got the mediums, the psychics, the we've called them that for years, right? The witches from prior to, right? That gets a little hot sometimes, and yet there's this seeming ubiquitous occurrence of it around the planet that we haven't really delved into to understand, let alone integrate into our lives. Because it's
Well,
obvious these things are happening and they
there's
happen to a number of
one
people.
problem that I find with most of uh, what people, these oracular people,
Hmm.
are delivering from person to person, place to places. This has become, a new age populist movement. You have a lot of people saying the exact same thing and thinking that they're the originator.
Yeah, is there an original thought? There's an argument, right?
Yes, exactly. Now, I look at specific preternatural writings that take meaning. And we could talk about the visions of the ancient Gnostics. We can talk about the visions of John Dee and Edward Kelly and their Enochian prophecies.
Well, what about Paul Joseph?
Well, before we get to Paul Joseph, I think we should talk about Madame Blavatsky and Aleister Crowley.
Oh,
All of these people have created very strong metaphysical, visionary um, uh, infusions into our culture
absolutely.
that are
Right.
resonating,
Blavatsky
clicking
first,
in.
and Alice Bailey took that work and expanded it into her
Yeah,
own.
and as much as I disagree with what Alice Bailey did and where the Theosophists have gone, it's still a development,
Right.
right? And so others, I'm sure, appreciate it. I just can't figure out why. Um, uh,
So
so
with
we we have to
Crowley and,
we have
and
to, as a
Blavatsky,
community, come together eventually
right?
and find the mythos that brings in a new field of archetypes, told by people who are able to tell this story. You know what I'm saying? Who themselves have risen, above the din.
Hmm.
above the populist vision. And the way the world works, that usually occurs sometime from the day after he's dead, or give or take 1,000 years. Uh, um,
Well, but do you find today that and it may just because, you know, we're now connected through the internet, right? And we can see a lot more of the activities going on. But do you sense that there is growth in the interest of this? How can I be more of me? How can I connect with who I really am? How can I connect to the world around me in ways that are healthy and harmonious rather than constrictive and restrictive
well,
and separative?
let's look at harmonious for a minute. What do you mean by that?
Well, first of all, can we all get along? Right? That's the first step of that. Even in the disagreements, right? There might
So
be.
when you say harmonious living, the world is moved to a state of peace?
I don't know that we'll ever be in a pure state of peace because we don't grow in that place,
Yes.
right?
God forbid we should ever achieve world peace. I'll tell you that right now.
Well, in harmony chaos is included in harmony, right? It's all it's
It's
part of that
interaction.
one,
It's interaction. What
right?
creates the chaos?
Right.
What?
Now,
I'm asking you a question. What
oh,
what
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 creates the
creates the
chaos?
chaos?
The chaos is usually created from something you're not sure of or don't know and you're afraid of.
I don't accept that moral argument. The chaos is created because we each have generated our own wills, and we're pursuing the course of our own orbit in our own way. And
Let
we're
me
going to
reframe what
interact
I
with
said then, and
people and
maybe this will
things.
make more sense because I think we're saying the same thing. Those areas that I spoke of come as a secondary response from not being coherent with self.
No, I, I say the same interactions would happen if everybody was coherent with themselves.
Does coherence
It's not a
bring,
moral argument.
well,
The interactions are
I
going to
don't know that I'm
happen.
making a moral argument.
I'm
I'm
going to come
looking at
in there and
vibrationally.
I'm a 25-year-old Renaissance man, and the woman sitting across the table thinking of whether or not she wants to date me is turning around saying, "This guy's never going to pay for my baby," and
Right.
she's perfectly right in her pursuit, and I'm perfectly right in mine, but we've clashed, right?
Sure.
Two guys, sit next to each other in the bar, end up getting drunk together and talking real deep to each other, and they're the best of buddies for the rest of their lives. The chemical reaction created an integrated unit that was like the
Right.
egregore of their friendship, right? So sometimes we combine into substances, other times we explode.
Which is all part of that process of attempting to find coherence or to have that love and being loved that we're attempting to find through methods that may not be prudent, right? Because there's things that we've either learned or been told or processed or programmed with.
Well, think of the complexity of young boys and girls growing up,
Right.
trying to figure out how to properly make love to each other and what that really
Well,
means,
sure. But as you
work
mature and
together.
you get to that place, you learn that there's this um, process of coming together and exploding happens less because you've been able to develop the discernment and the capacity to determine your own way through things that are less chaotic and yet still challenges you in
But you see,
ways to
when I say
grow.
to get away from the morality of this idea, um,
What do you
I
mean by
do not
morality?
think that that would
Let me
change
clarify because
anything. The
before we
chaos
go on,
isn't
let me
coming
clarify
from my
what you mean
loss
by
of self,
morality.
huh?
Could you define morality for me?
Well,
Because I may be
you're
misunderstanding you,
giving me
please.
in very veiled ways. You're giving me things you should be doing that you didn't do or you need to do.
That's not where I'm coming from.
Well, but this is what I'm
I'm
hearing.
coming from a vibrational stand place where there is a certain path that we're on that we've created by choices that we've made, and then we have to deal with
But
that
you
in
see,
order.
we just got done earlier talking about the, intelligent, enlightened guy,
Mhm.
interacting with a world of zombies. What the hell is any energy frequency going to do for me there? Unless I
It's
could just learn to turn mine off so they don't see me.
well, again, this a lot discernment, right? Where to cast your pearls.
Well, yes, discernment is making judgment calls that are necessary, right? You don't walk down the street and marry the first person that you see,
Right.
right? So you're always making judgments, and I think that's really, really important. And
Not that you're necessarily judging
the
someone, you're judging
morality
how
that
you
you
fit with
develop,
them.
you're going to develop a morality. And you're going to make your own right and wrong from your experiences. But
Okay.
as soon as we begin to discuss right and wrong, we get to, uh,
We lose it. We lose perspective because we don't know.
well, we
Things
screwed
just
up.
are. How do
We
we,
screwed up. There is
that's like
no
you fall into
way.
that dualistic thing. And the trick is to learn to live in paradox because you're going to experience the extremes in either direction.
Well, yes.
And you don't have to be pulled in either direction in order to acknowledge and or experience them.
Well, I'm just saying that, when it comes to morality, we can't really convey, its ideals properly. Um,
I'll give you that.
you know, uh, because your morality is based on your experience, some of what may be very right for you may be very wrong for me.
Sure.
So, and I might even bring negative judgment on your moral choices.
Which is your fine.
Okay.
That's none of my business, is it?
Well, yes, it's none of your business unless your moral choices, of course, hurt other people, right?
Right.
Then we get legal about it.
And in those situations, when you're in work groups, workplace, teams, communities, there are those compensations that have to be made of that in order to have some kind of order, right? And be able to work with each other because
Well,
you,
that the negotiation of social conditions
right.
is again, but it's built on one's morality. I'll give you an example. There's one guy where I work, and um he is a greedy pig who thinks he's the supervisor, and he's just another worker like me.
Hmm.
And he's constantly ratting on people, playing the game with the boss. He checks everybody's schedule. He knows when everybody's supposed to be there. If you do something out of step, he's on top of you. And everybody hates his guts.
I was
I
going
mean,
to
of
say,
course,
don't you just love those kind of people?
yeah.
My God.
And and of course he holds his power because, you know, the boss accepts what he does.
Hmm.
The boss isn't there to manage people
Well,
emotionally.
in a way, the boss kind of gives up his authority to him because he doesn't need it because he keeps track of it, right?
Well, the authority he takes as a false authority. It has nothing
Sure,
to do with
sure.
the authority the boss has.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Okay? It's an annoying authority. He's a rat.
Sure.
So, he's going to go and tell somebody, smoke too close to the door, and they should have been farther away from the building, that kind of shit.
And,
They came in
in the
later.
business world, we call those organizational destroyers.
Yes, they're organizational destroyers, and there's others like him there. One or two others.
Hmm.
One guy bathes once a month, and his home is in his car in our parking lot. Think about it.
Hmm.
So there are characters, and there's social disease, there's mental disease, there's all these things. Um, And even for those of us that can, look like we have it all together or what have you, we don't really know. Like for example, I was the runt in the pack. And I was also a year younger than all the kids I went to school with. So, kindergarten going up, that's a big, big difference, right?
Mm,
Um, and so I was picked on and this and that. And so I had a very tough luck life. Now, I'm not telling that again to play a violin. I've gotten through all of that. I'm 65 friggin' years old. Um, but I do find that I'm capable of saying that somebody's got to toughen up when the world today doesn't want you to toughen up anymore. They want you to start bleeding all over the place and look for help. And
sure.
I'm like, toughen up and keep walking. You know,
Yeah, keep
and
keep moving, and you bring up a good point because and especially looking at COVID, right? That was a massive attempt to just control everyone. And whether it was a social experiment, whether it happened on purpose, intentionally or unintentionally, doesn't really matter. It gave everyone an opportunity through the obsession on self-hygiene and sequestration to self-examine, right? What really works for them and what are they willing to do about it? Are they willing to accept being told what to do, how to do, when to do, vaccinated, all that kind of stuff, follow the rigid prescriptive
what
path?
we found was
Or,
people followed their political ideologies. It continued to be, it just became another divisive issue. And,
well, there were those that saw something fresh and began looking for others that saw the freshness in that too, because now this understanding of a programmed life has now been exposed. And people were talking about that. They were looking for better ways and they're beginning to organize more
what do you mean
socially.
by a programmed life?
Well, for instance, like today, when the social media is run by the ROI of rage, and all of the stakeholders know this. I've had several conversations with people who've been in boardroom meetings that's really what's going on. That gets more activity on social media than anything else, or has. So,
Just like it did with newspapers, the yellow press.
well, and this is that oppression, right? That comes from being rather uneducated. For instance, in America, our educational levels now, the reader levels, right? Newspapers at a fifth grade level, right? So this diminishing of the public through whatever systems have been in place to do so were purposeful,
We're
right? We can't say
putting
they
we're
weren't.
putting kids through 14 years of education. School, school, 6 cruel hours of our lives. At the end of that 14 years of education, 99.9% of the students that will graduate and get their degrees will arrive knowing nothing of history, science, art, culture, literature, or anything. They will know how
Exactly my
to
point.
read a street sign and read a label on a can,
Right.
and they won't understand the label on the can. We'll give
Sure.
them 50-50 on understanding the street sign.
Now,
Okay.
conversely, and I found this out through my wife, who grew up in the USSR, their educational system was far more robust. They taught them about everything. They wanted to give them information about life in general and how things fit. And so they expected more from their
Well,
citizenry because of that.
there was a tiered society there.
Well, I'm not
And
saying that. I'm just talking
yeah,
about, and yes, they had various levels. She had more access than some
yeah.
do.
And
However,
and we had our premium institutions too, not the general education.
right.
And I
Well,
don't
in
think
your
the
music
general
training,
education they did nearly as good as what the United States did at the time. There was
sure.
no creativity in their culture,
In which culture?
the Soviet culture.
Oh, I disagree.
I think it was
Uh,
shunned out. Oh,
you
Frank, I
you
had a
had
guy
all
that used to
kinds of
get pirated
musicians
records
and
outside of the,
um,
from inside the Soviet Union, and they had a rock.
composers,
Incredible.
authors, musicians, scientists. There's all kinds of people that were encouraged because of their skill set. And like you, right? They recognized people's genius and they put it in play. They allowed them they assisted them to work on their genius, to embody it more. And the structure was there to do it because you know as well as I do, that's a really disciplined structure in order to be able to move all of that information through your being and have some cognizance afterwards of being able to manage yourself and navigate reality. Now, you know,
Most of the residents in today's Russia still use outhouses.
well, how do you know that? Because from what
When
I
the
see, my
Ukrainian war started,
you know,
cameras and journalists um, started going through Russian neighborhoods,
right,
and you'd go down entire streets, and there'd be think of about a working class street, where all the houses are tight next to each other, um, small backyards where the outhouses were, where they still did outdoor laundry, things like that. Um, their culture, what they gave their elite class, is what we gave our elite class.
well, we're going to have
And
to
from a different
disagree on our
perspective, with a
perspectives of
different
that
philosophy,
country.
of course.
Yeah,
But
I'm sorry, Paul, but we're going to have to disagree, agree to
okay.
disagree on our perceptions of Russia, which is cool. Again, it goes back to what you were saying earlier, right? We can still have disagreements and be able to have a conversation, right?
Well, we don't. When you start getting into the ridiculousness of doctrinal crap,
Right,
um, then you start to have problems, right? Because
right.
if my doctrine is the one and true doctrine, okay, let's talk about metaphysics at its most basic. It's really a synonym for speculation. And
To
the
some it
great
is
philosophers,
for
that's
quantum
what they
physics
call it.
now.
Well, the
Quantum
great
physics
philosophers
now is
call it
proving a lot of
speculative
what
metaphysics.
metaphysicians have known for decades or for millennia. You know, the
No,
mystics.
I'll disagree with you on that. I think our awareness of, again, there was no golden age. Our awareness of what was then has evolved since then to what our awareness is now.
Do you think that our awareness is capable of growing to the point of being able to understand the science within the mysticism and the metaphysics?
Oh, yeah, it was there once, it'll be there again.
Okay. Do you think that quantum physics and those that are exploring it with, especially with quantum computing and being able to determine that, oh, yeah, there's this multidimensional aspect now of quantum computing that also might reflect the reality that we didn't know was there, but only heard about through these texts and individuals throughout our history that have explored or maybe experienced some of those realms and explained it in their own way, which may not have made sense to the people around them.
Um, in my book, Scientific Illuminism, I talk about how science and religion are becoming reunited through
Hmm.
modern physics.
I see that as an inevitability, don't you?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and I also devote about half the book to showing how that same relationship filters into biology, not just physics.
Hmm. Well,
And
it's all
how it goes
connected,
to the
right?
very structure of our souls.
Again, we're taking another view of oneness, all right? So when things are so, you can find those same patterns, maybe slightly different, but similar things throughout different structures, the biology, the science, the metaphysics, even the educational
Well, I'm
realms.
not talking about patterns here. Um, However you might go after metaphysical speculation, patterns in mathematics like Pythagoras and Plato, or whether you go into grander ideations that, reflect the German idealists or the French existentialists. Um, and I think they're all combined. I think there's a growth
Layers,
there.
right? They build on each other and interact in some way.
And I no longer think the ancient truths are the truth because they're ancient. I no longer think that the Vedas have proven themselves to the modern world in any way. I no longer think that, the grimoires of, early Christianity and, that have made all the magical manuals. I think most of that's, again, stuff that may have made sense in their own place and time, but don't
Mhm.
make sense in our time. Um, Yes, the Vedas, have began
But they
pushing
do,
this
do they
story
not
that the
make sense
Buddhists have
because of the way we're looking
encapsulated.
at them?
Hmm?
Paul, do they not make sense possibly because of the perspective of which we are looking at them? Is there another perspective that maybe they would make sense with
Well, the
and that there
perspective of our
shows?
modern age. But, the perspective of our modern age speaks just entirely different to the moral systems that those things have become. When the spirit leaves the temple, morality rushes in to fill the void.
Hmm.
And the spirit has left all of those temples. And it's all about how well you mistreat women or whatever other
Right.
boogeyman you want to bring out in all these things. And when you get to all these little guru things with all their little new age mumbo jumbos happening, you find half of them are fucking everybody else's daughters and stealing their mortgages. Right?
I can't argue with that. That was a truth, right? And yet, do you see things um, moving away from that? Do you see or the possibility of that extension of the nuggets from that kind of um, exploration and
The only thing that I see that has changed since the classical era is in the classical era, there may have been 20 or 30 human beings on the earth, and today there's 8 billion. So that one would arise on great occasion, maybe every 500 years in the ancient world, that could say something broader than the grunt level of life that all these knuckle draggers were living.
hmm.
So, Buddha comes along 500 years later, Jesus, 300 years later, Muhammad, and they all keep coming along. And, in the same way that, Vishnu appeared in Krishna, and he appeared in this one and that one and this one and that one, Vishnu. Um, and so they build these spiritual systems, based on ideas. And for the most part, the ancient Hindu scriptures are monistic. We're all one.
Okay.
See,
So
now
let
I'm a dualist, and I believe that monism is an absurdity.
Well, it
Because
would be
if we're
if
all
you're
one,
professing to be a dualist,
why
right?
bother
But I made a
communicating?
comment earlier about the paradox of looking from the view of one and being able to embrace that spectrum, right? And not seeing it as duality, just seeing it part of what
Well,
is.
but then again, if we're all one, why even bother to convey an idea to each other?
Well, that seems kind of absurd because that's
I'm pointing out the absurdity. I'm
well,
pointing
it's
out the
being absurd,
absurdity.
and it's coming from a place where you totally misunderstood what I've said so far.
Well,
In that
the
aspect of being
the
one,
all
we all
one.
have that one within us, that desire to love and be loved, that energy of creation that we are all part of, and the consciousness that connected to it that we're able to
Well, but you're
utilize
using a
to
very
navigate
common New
reality.
Age. You're using a very common New Age term when you say we're all one. If you want to say we're all
But I
stars and we
explained what
all
I
have
meant
this
by that.
individual
Okay,
fire,
Paul,
that
I'm sorry, but excuse me. I don't think you really understood. I tried to re-explain it because you had this opinion before, and that wasn't where I was coming from. And I re-explained
yeah,
what that
but
meant to me.
again, you're confusing me. You're using a New Age term. When you start to say we're all one, the implication is that our lives are an illusion and we have to give up
I
our
don't know that
ego.
that's a new
If you
age
were to
term that
say
you made.
instead, we're all stars with a fiery core that does all these things, then that gives me a whole different perception. And I'll pull out the pom poms and start cheering for that.
Well, how I was trying to explain it was from my perspective of understanding that there is this, having gone through a near-death experience or a death experience, however you want to term it, being embraced by the light and being completely surrounded by it, feeling like I'm part of it and yet individuated in it. Like it's everything and yet I'm also individuated. And then going into a different area where there was pinpoints of light surrounding me and understanding when I came back into my body that an experience of cosmic consciousness based on descriptions of those who've had it before me, and then coming back into my body and recognizing that we're all cosmic consciousness condensed into form, just unaware. Well, it's that point of light that was, I don't know how else to explain it, that is the core of that desire to love and be loved that each of us carry, that's connected to that spirit that you talked about, the undefined, right? And each of us have that. Whether we're aware of it or not, does not make our responsibility of it any less.
I'm aware that you've had your experience, and it's not an unusual experience. Other people have had it, plenty of other people. Um,
I'm not saying it's not,
but
it was unique to me,
but
but
what I'm
not
trying to
unique in
say
the
is
overall prospect of it.
what I'm trying to say is that I didn't have that experience.
It was
So,
hard to, and this is where the crux of understanding kind of falls short, is without a direct experience of something that gives you a perspective from which to at least be similar in, right? It's really hard to grok because you don't have that. You don't that
well, in a
experience, the
sense,
sense,
it's
the
a pearl
memory,
being cast
the
before swine. In a sense,
comment.
and I don't mean that on a moralistic level that I'm calling myself a pig.
Yeah.
Um, uh,
So don't snort.
again,
No.
you're casting a seed of experience to
Right.
somebody who has not had that experience, and that cannot be conveyed. Okay. Um, what you do off of that can be conveyed.
Right. Well, that's the whole thing of where do you go with that? How do you integrate it? How do you make it part of your life that's beneficial, not only to you, but to others that are with you? And from that perspective of being a servant leader, for instance, whether it's in your home or, or for a company, your own business, in a band, whatever situation that you're in, there's this desire to be your best and to, or at least it appears that on uh, that path, right, you eventually get to that place
Well, here's
where,
where I can relate to your experience, your
okay,
death experience, and here's how I can relate to it. You've had a singular moment in your life of transcendent importance. Um,
That's a
it
good term.
becomes a spiritual awakening. It becomes a conversion, a spiritual conversion. Um,
Kind of hard
in
not to when you're being given a lot of information and
Well,
right.
William James points out that there's four kinds of conversions, right? One is deep and lasts forever. One is deep and lasts a short time. One is not so deep and lasts forever. And one is not so deep and lasts a long time. So whatever the level of your experience there in that term, and those are just technically dividing how it manifests.
Hmm.
It certainly is manifesting right now quite deeply. And it's given you a mission. It's given you an opportunity to be creative and to present something to the world that is within you that is of value.
Right.
Okay, that
Well,
primarily has to
isn't
start out,
that
of course, being
the
of
intent?
value to you. Okay, but then you've got to somehow integrate that into the world that others can gain from that value.
Right, which is what
What
we've done with planetary citizens and the idea of taking this concept and putting it into a structure that's understandable, makes sense, and benefits many.
Well, I would always be concerned about anything involving many because I'm quite averse to populism in any way.
Oh, sure.
But that,
Understanding all of that, but when you're, honestly, as when you feel like you're called to do something, part of you is not going to be satisfied until you acquiesce to that calling. So why not do
well,
it?
I have that calling.
Well, it's obvious.
My origination of that calling is from a different place from yours. And
Well, it ought to
you
be
know,
because you're not, we're
yeah.
not the same body,
And our
right?
metaphysics are different. But I have that calling. And I understand that. So here I am at the Gnostic Church of Light. I have that calling so much I went and I bought a fucking building.
Right,
Okay.
right.
I'm not retiring at 67 like I should. Okay. Now,
Well, your life is
with that
that.
in mind, I'm I realize that I want to say a very similar thing to the world that you want to say. And yet I don't want to say it to everybody. I don't even want to proselytize it, preach it, what have you. I want to uh, I want to build a battery here that attracts people. And we attract people by the work that we do. So I write books, I write essays, I interact with ideas that I present. On a daily basis, if you're in any of our church groups, you're getting a morning meme from me automatically.
Hmm.
You join our Preparing for Gnosis course. It's like months long, weekly email program with video,
Right,
books to
right.
read,
Well,
whatnot.
you're just
Um,
immersed in it. So in that immersion, and you kind of set up a perfect segue, of the message and what you want to share and how you want to share that. If you, granted, with your permission, if you could share something with someone or ones um, about some advice that you can offer for life
if someone
and
was
on
to
it.
come up to me and say, Paul, tell me about your church. What is this Gnosticism stuff? And I would say it starts with you. And the first thing that you need to affirm is your own genius. And what we try to do is to show that your own genius evolves out of your own inner ambition. And we want a place for you not just to flourish, where we can, help inspire you with the ideas to bring out in you what's there, but also a place where you can show up once a month and recharge your spiritual batteries.
Hmm.
It's a place of community and camaraderie. We have a Eucharist and a
So
Mass.
for those people who can't show up, what would you offer them?
Well, our masses are online. Every mass is there. You can look at the
Okay.
entire history of our masses.
Well, cool. Well, I was hoping a little
We
different.
have an online congregation. We
Sure.
get a good viewership of them every
Oh,
month.
good. Good. And we'll have that link below in the description. So that was, we went into kind of our closing there with the potential advice you could offer. Um, I was hoping for a little more direct advice, but you did give it. It's all in you, right? That's the important
Well, we
part.
start with that.
Right.
After that, we do try to present ideas that will inspire on a spiritual level without presenting a formal doctrine. We want to get you interested in the holy books of Thelema. We want to get you interested in Blavatsky's Secret Doctrine. We want to get you
Hmm.
interested in what John Dee and Edward Kelly wrote and the researches of ancient Christianity and Gnosticism.
Okay.
We want to bring out history to you
That's a good
because
next step.
history and education is important. So we want to
It is.
educate. You know, we focus on the writings of Ralph Waldo Emerson and Walt Whitman. So we bring out a lot of an American idea, and we want to, while we're constantly giving away, all of that. Eventually, we want a place of community where you come with your family, you recharge those spiritual batteries because you're out in the world getting beat up, and here you come
Right.
and it's a coming home, it's a homecoming, so to speak, and
Well, we need to become home, speaking of, because we generally, I usually allocate some time and we've gone way beyond it. Um, and I really appreciate the conversation we've had today, Paul. It's been wonderful. And thank you so much for the
I
wisdom and
had
insight
fun.
that you shared.
It
I
was
did
great.
too. I did
Yeah.
too.
And
Right.
I'm grateful for
Very
you letting me
spirited
come on here and
conversation.
do this.
Paul, I want to thank you once again for sharing your insight and wisdom and having such a spirited conversation with me today. Thank you so much.
I enjoyed every minute of it. Thanks for letting me be here.
You're welcome. And namaste and in la catch and welcome and thank you for sticking with us for this episode, One World in a New World. I'm Zen Benefiel, your host. Confused on the timing as I may, by all means, don't forget to subscribe, comment, share, and stop by planetarycitizens.net and pick up your free book. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.